much for inviting me to be here. I'm glad to come and worship with you and have this opportunity to teach. Whenever you're ready with the PowerPoint. Just to let you, my wife's not here. While I was in May, the end of April, beginning of May, I was in New York to speak about 7-8 times in a couple of weeks. And on a Saturday night, I got a phone call from my son about 11 o'clock saying, Mom fell and we think she broke her wrist. And sure enough, then when she finally got looked at, yep, she needed surgery. And so she had to get surgery. She's got a plate put in her hand. And now it's just begun occupational therapy this week to restore strength and mobility. So please keep her in prayer for that as she's now beginning to use her hand for the first time after several weeks of it being in a cast, etc. So for physically and for encouragement as well as she does these things. There, it just reminds you, I've got the website, Rabbi Ron Speaks. If you have questions for me, anything you'd like, there is a contact page, and so you go there and you can communicate with me. And so I welcome that at any time. Let's see what's next. All right, here, one of my sons, Caleb, he is in Israel now and then will be in India, total of 10 weeks. He's out there doing some ministry. And so he gets a chance to go around Israel and do some outreach, serve the people, meet some needs. And then in India, he'll be off to the Himalaya mountains because what happens is a lot of Israelis, just like it used to be years back here in America, once you graduate high school, it is mandatory enlistment in the military. Their military has to stay active day and night. And then what happens is after people finish their tour in service in the military, then the young people, like those that were in the military here, say, now what do I do with my life? Just like we would say after high school. They then have first military, then have to ask the question. And what's happened, interesting, many Jews are secular, but a great number of young Israelis, when they finish their time serving in the military, they go to the Himalaya mountains trying to seek purpose and direction in life. And they just start hiking the mountains. And so therefore, there's all sorts of people waiting for them. Legitimate, biblical, and all sorts of cults, etc. as well. And so they will be going to Himalaya to share the good news and to try to minister to all these young people that are seeking the Lord for purpose and finding out why they're created and what are they supposed to do with their life. So that's what Caleb's doing. My daughter Asha, she goes to school in New York. She decided she liked cold weather. And so she said right away she was going back to college. I think she'll be starting a third year, but she's actually there working this summer. She got a job with orientation for new students, so she's still there in Cortland, New York for the summer. My oldest son, Ravi, he's now at Messiah Conference. He's the president of the Young Messianic Jewish Alliance, the youth movement, and so he's there. It's a week-long conference, so he's helping run the youth program for all the teens. So he's in Pennsylvania outside of Harrisburg doing that. And Reeve and Gita, my twins, ROTC and Civil Air Patrol is still a big, big part of their life along with cross-country running. And so they're usually out the door around 7 a.m. running about 5K. And as well, they're always off on some military encampments for a weekend or a week. And so that's a big part of what they're doing. If we take this... Good. Here's something that as well, what we'll have to do is to figure out, are any of you on Facebook? Does anybody go on Facebook at all? One of the things that I have, and we'll have to see how to help people that are not on Facebook, something that I've done that I was just encouraged to start for those that are ministry partners and support us now as you do. And so what I've done is I've just started it this month in June, called Torah for Life, and just yesterday or the day before, an artist sent me a new logo, so hopefully soon she'll put that on there. But I started a private Facebook page called Torah for Life, and what I do is every Friday I put a video teaching for about 10 or 15 minutes. And so what happens is the Jewish people for ages, they have weekly set readings. Every weekend they have a certain few chapters in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, so that they systematically read through it every year. And so what I've started in June is I've just started now for those that support the ministry and help us to do what we have to do, that I would provide a teaching there. And so it's a private Facebook page, and then I'll do the video teaching, and then as well along with the video is a Word document of notes to go along with it. And what you have to do is you just have to be a personal friend of mine on Facebook. And so if you're not and you're on Facebook, go ahead and look for Ron Goldberg. My face will be the picture because there's more than one Ron Goldberg. And then go ahead and ask to be my friend and send me a message and say, sign me up for the teaching. Anything like that, just teaching. And that will give you access and permission to get on that page and every Friday. And if there's any person that knows how to work around the social media world, and you can tell me what else can we do to make that available, that how that video maybe can be sent to someone here so that there's another way to make it available so that anyone in the church could have it since you support us. But so this is something I just started and welcome you to sign up for if you like. Now let's see, I can't see good. We'll go there. I'm going to have to take the phone out. I can't see the clock with the light, so I know what time it is. Okay, good. All right. While I was in New York in May, and then also one of the things to let you know is after I went to New York in May, I came home, saw my wife recovering from surgery. I couldn't get back in time for the surgery, but God was so good. Caleb, I said, he called me. He just got home from college the day before she fell. So at least he was there to take care of Mom. I got home. I was home for about a week and a half, and then I went to Uganda, Africa, and was invited by Pastor Matt Moore here in Tampa Bay to go with him. Pastors in Uganda asked us to go and to teach about Israel and to teach about the feast. That may have been the first teaching I did invited here about Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles in October. And so they wanted to learn what these feasts are and what role could they possibly play in the life of a Christian. And so we went there to Uganda, Africa, and had the chance, Pastor Matt and I, to teach for the time that we were there from like 9, 10 in the morning till 4, 5 in the afternoon every day about Israel and the feast. They said they want us back again to teach them some more. They have a tremendous love for Israel, and so they were so excited and eager for me to come. One pastor's wife that then fed us a meal on our way back to the airport when our trip was finished was just ecstatic. I can't believe there's a Jew in my house. I think we were out in the villages. We weren't in the city of Entebbe, the head, and so they'd never seen, I think, any of the people in these villages, a real live Jew face to face. I was the first Jew in all these 3 churches anyone had ever met, and constantly that same reaction was given to me by so many people. One of the pastors that organized the trip said, Ron, do you realize that when Israel, after the Holocaust, Britain first offered the Jewish people Uganda as a homeland, to have some land within Uganda. And the pastor said to me, we understand that they needed to say no because in the Bible, as I taught when I was here before, God gave them land as an eternal possession. And so therefore the pastor said it was appropriate that they said no to Uganda and went to Israel, and we agree biblically that was the right choice. He says, but our lives would be so much better if they lived here with us. With all the discoveries, the things they've created in agriculture, medicine, technology, our lives would be so different if they were our neighbors living here. And he said, Ron, will you come back next year and bring us an Israeli to teach us about agriculture? We need help to improve our lives. And then Pastor Matt called me about a week ago and said he's already working through this process, thinking about next year going back to Africa. And so that'll be one of the things that ministry support will help enable me to do. He has plans. Pastor Matt's on my board. I mentioned we were going to incorporate Ron Goldberg Ministries probably. The 501c3 has come through, and Pastor Matt is on the board of directors with me. So if he wants me to go and he's on my board, then who am I to say no? And so we're hoping next year to go back to Uganda to teach and for me to help connect them with somebody to help them in some tangible ways. To help improve their lives. I didn't realize it until also Matt told me Entebbe Airport is where we flew into. We just celebrated the anniversary, and today's July 1st? Tomorrow, July 2nd, is the anniversary of on June 27th, 1976, a plane was hijacked by German and Palestinian terrorists that had 106 or 7 Israelis and 200 and something French people and others, and was hijacked and taken to Entebbe when Idi Amin was the dictator there. And they were there held hostage, and that was the airport I flew out of. And I didn't make the connection and realize that, so I had just gotten, when I got home, the movie Victory on Entebbe, of Entebbe, to actually see the story of what happened. And Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, his brother was the man who led the amazing rescue to get into Uganda and save all but 3 of the hostages there. Absolutely amazing story, and I had the opportunity to be there at that, or watch the movie and say, yes, I was just there about 2 weeks ago in that very airport. And so that was a great opportunity, and looking forward to going back next year. Well, while in New York, I did a lot of teaching on this. Israel is the end times. I may have probably shared, depending when my teaching was, Israel, and specifically Jerusalem, got back in the headlines. I mean, it's always in the headlines. It is always a point of contention. It is always there in the news, people talking about it. On December 6th, President Trump declared Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Jewish people. President Trump knows how to get a reaction out of people. He's got a gift for that. And I was told his mother was in like showbiz or something, entertainment, and so she told him growing up, always get your name in the news. And if you do, you'll get a lot of enemies, but you'll also get a lot of people that will like you and you'll make money. And he learned well from his mother. And he made that statement, but this is actually true. And I shared some of those scriptures. It is the eternal capital. And CNN, that very day you see there, they were on top of things. They had a word from the Lord and declared their headline story, Trump's Jerusalem decision promises upheaval. Huh? They understood. Yeah, everybody understands that. And it has been true. And so when he declared that the embassy was going to move, President Abbas of the Palestinian people, he then made a statement saying, he will never allow this to happen. Tension increased there at the border with Israel and as well. And if we look at the next slide, this is something I didn't realize. Not only was there things that we read about in the paper, but here is an article from the Jerusalem Post. The headlines, winds of war will kite and balloon fires spark a major conflict in Gaza. For 3 months as well, what has been happening is that every day or so, there are young people out there lighting kites and balloons on fire at the border, working with the wind, and then letting the wind carrying these balloons that are on fire over the border into Israel. And no lives, and this has been going on for 3 months. No lives have been lost. But I read that since March 30th, over 2.5 thousand acres of fields, forests, and agricultural lands have been ravaged by fires, by balloons. I mean, you think about balloons, I think parties, celebration, happy. You imagine living here and just waking up in the morning and seeing balloons on fire, coming over, dropping into your backyard and setting your yard on fire. This is the life that people are living there. And it's horrible, the whole situation. It's difficult on all sides of the borders. And so tensions are increased. And Israel, it's been generally younger people incited by Hamas that are doing these balloons, setting them on fire. And so Israel's been trying to hold back because the last thing they want to do is go in, even though these are people setting things on fire, destroying their property, they're young people. And they don't want to hurt anybody, and they know as well the backlash that will come. But the people in Israel are saying, you can't just sit there and ignore this. Our lands are being destroyed. And so Israel is being forced to think, how can they respond without inciting a whole nother war? But as far as I can remember in my life, this is, it's that cycle up and down. You get a little bit of calmness. It's just a time of regrouping. And then all of a sudden things happen again and tensions flare. and difficult times and war just comes and goes in the Middle East. We're blessed to be living here in America. We are very blessed that we don't have that fear that they have. Things are difficult and getting worse in some ways, but they're still nothing like they are there in the Middle East and in other places around the world. And it is a difficult life. And so, but it keeps going up and down, but you know, there's a day it's not going to go back down again. There is going to be a day when the nations invade Jerusalem. And here what I've got is two different passages. Zechariah 12, Judah will be surrounded, sieged and encircled, as well as Jerusalem, and all the nations of the earth are gathered against her. And Zechariah 14, he reaffirms it, for I'll gather all the nations to Jerusalem to battle. So there is a day coming, it is unavoidable, unfortunately. It's not like we could sit down and negotiate such an amazing peace process that peace will reign forever in Jerusalem. Ultimately it will, but before that happens, this will first come to pass. And if you just look at that map, there's Israel surrounded by people that hate him and that want to kill him. And Arafat in the past, and I don't know who else in the present, has said at times, we want to help them go into the Mediterranean Sea. Now, it's not to enjoy a beautiful day at the beach. He's hoping to push him off into the sea without any swim lessons first and drown, and that's the statement that they've made, to kill and destroy all the Jews. And so they've got the sea on one side, but then with Iraq and Syria, Damascus, Lebanon, there's enemies that just would love to kill them. And they keep talking and talking about the day will come then when they'll invade. And Zechariah tells us that day will come to pass. It's unavoidable. There's nothing we can do to stop it, because if it's in the Bible, anything and everything in the Bible is going to pass. And so therefore, that means while we need as good human beings to do what we can to pursue peace, to make peace, make every effort to pursue peace, we also have to remember this, what it says, and be prepared for this day. If we can take the next scripture. Here we have in Zechariah 12, I'll make Jerusalem, though, God says what? An immovable rock. Over all the nations there. And all who try to move it will injure themselves. And then verses 8 and 9, on that day the Lord will shield those who live in Jerusalem. On that day I'll set out to destroy all the nations that attack Jerusalem. And the Lord, in 14, he reminds us that the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. And so the Lord's going to intervene. This is going to happen. Nations are going to invade. And Israel is grateful for American support, but they're ultimately not trusting in America to protect them. Those that understand the scriptures realize God's going to protect them. And it says that what? Jerusalem's going to be an immovable rock. And so imagine that giant rock, boulder, is Israel, is Jerusalem. Now that guy's trying to push it. The nations are coming, and they're going to try to push and remove Jerusalem, remove the Jews from the area. But what's the likely thing that could ever happen? What's more likely? Are they going to move that rock, or the rock's going to collapse and fall down and destroy them? And that's what Zechariah 12 says. They're going to try like that. Oh, we can go back for 1 second there. And he's going to try to go. They're going to try to come back and push and destroy and remove the Jewish people. But God's going to deal with it. And he is not going to allow this to happen. But as well, so the Lord's going to fight. But one thing that's really neat, it's not just going to be God's going to orchestrate events to then allow this success and victory for the Jewish people, because verse 10 tells us what? That after the earlier part of 12, the nations are unite, come and destroy Israel, but then it says they'll look on me, the one they have pierced. And they'll mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. They're going to look on him who's what? Pierced. Who is that has been pierced? Jesus. It's not just that God's going to come and orchestrate events to allow them a victory, but Jesus himself is going to go to Jerusalem to fight the enemies of Israel and to defeat them. So this end time this invasion of Israel is actually an event that God uses to trigger the return of Jesus to earth. And then we go to the next slide and we see, where is he coming back? Listen, Seminole here, it's a nice pretty little place. You got some beautiful beaches, but this is not the first place he's coming to. Now, he's heard some wonderful reports of how beautiful the beaches are, and it's on his bucket list, okay? To make a trip after things settle down and peace is restored, he's planning on coming and visiting, okay? But first, this is where his feet are going. Anyone been there? The Mount of Olives? Oh, it's a beautiful place. And it tells us both in Zechariah and Acts, Zechariah, in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east. That's where his feet are going to come back. And Acts, Yeshua was lifted up and his disciples are looking on. And they're looking on, and two men in white clothing stood there. And they said, "Man of Galilee, why do you stand there looking into the sky? This Yeshua who's been taken up you into heaven, he's coming back in the same way that you've watched him go up into heaven." And they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem. And so Jesus, when he comes back, he is going to set his feet there at the Mount of Olives. And that's why they're pointing up. Keep your eyes on that piece of land. That's where he's going to return to first. And so we want to be watching there, the Mount of Olives, because that's where he's physically going to come down and plant his feet when he comes and returns. And then what's going to happen if we see the next slide? Where is he going to go? He's going to go down the mount. And what's across the street? The eastern gates, Jerusalem, and the part of Jerusalem, the eastern gates. But there's a couple of things of interest there in this picture. I've got those yellow arrows pointing to the two gates. What do you notice about those two gates? They're closed. Oops, we got a problem. How's Jesus going to get in? Well, what happened is that years ago, the 1500s, the Ottoman Turks sealed the gates. I think somebody must have read the scripture from Ezekiel and realized Messiah is going to come in, and they said, we can't let the Jews, and we can't let Messiah enter into Jerusalem. We're going to stop the Messiah from entering Jerusalem. So one, they seal the gates to stop him from getting in. And then does anyone know what's planted, what is built right in front of the gates as well? Graveyard, cemetery. Why is there a graveyard? Because the scriptures teach in Leviticus that Jewish people should not defile themselves by stepping over the graves of dead people. And so, hey, if the Messiah is a religious Jew and we've just surrounded the front gates with a cemetery, he won't be able to walk through the land and get in the gates. Is that not wonderful? They're thinking, they're smart. I read in John chapter 19, after Jesus had ascended. Well, he died, and then he rose again, and it says the disciples were scared of the Jewish leadership, and so they were in a house, the doors were locked, they're praying, help us, God, what do we do, what's going on? And what does that passage tell us in John 19? Jesus showed up, and he just walked through the locked door. So one, we already know that a locked door won't keep him out. But as well, who knows, we're going to see, they locked the doors, sealed them shut, put a cemetery there in front to keep him out. And so the gates today may be locked, but if we look at the next slide, Psalm 24, years as well before those gates were locked, David said, "Lift up your heads, O gates. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Now, that's not the eastern gates, but at least it was a picture that I could find showing the gates being open. Folks, I don't know what the Lord's going to do. Maybe that's one of the reasons a war has to happen in the end time. So there'll be rockets and tanks showing up on the scene, and one of the enemies of Israel will accidentally blow open the gates to allow Messiah to walk right on through. Who knows what God's going to do, but God let us know in the scriptures right here that those gates will be opened up in the end times so that Messiah can walk on through. When I was studying and putting this teaching together, it was interesting. I found out that in 1948, when Israel became a nation, Jordan was given the city of Jerusalem by Britain. And so Jordan at that time was ruling the city. And then there was the 6-Day War. And when the Jewish leadership met to discuss battle plan for the 6-Day War, some members of the Jewish military suggested that they catch Jordan off guard by blowing open the eastern gates. That's what they were going to do. They said, hey, we'll surprise him. We'll blow open the gates, and then we'll come in and we'll get him. But the leader of the group was an Orthodox religious Jew, and he vehemently protested that idea, stating the eastern gate can only be opened when Messiah comes. So the Jewish people that have read the scriptures, realize this gate will be opened when the Messiah comes. Now, the Ottoman Turks did not seal the gates out of a desire to be used to fulfill prophecy. But God just uses anybody and everybody to fulfill prophecy because He's sovereign. He's king over all the earth, and He can do what He wants. And so He used them to fulfill His plans and His purposes. And so they did it in hopes of trying to stop the Messiah from entering Jerusalem in the end times. But after reading that prophecy, they should have read Psalm chapter 2, verse 1. Why do they waste their time with futile plans? Or in the Message, what fools the nations are to rage against the Lord. How strange that men should try to outwit God. This is an important message for everybody on earth, including us. When people make plans to resist the will of God, they are wasting their time. Resistance is futile. And David, what does he actually do? He says that when people try to outwit and outsmart God, they're actually, what does he call them? Fools. Now, this verse doesn't just apply to the Ottoman Turks in the 1500s. It doesn't just apply to the nations in the end that are trying to destroy Jerusalem, but sadly it applies to all of us too, because each of us have moments where we say no to God, where we resist Him. God asks us to do something and we say, God, have you thought that thing through? Have you been watching? Do you see what's going on? God, this is obviously not a good time. What were you thinking? We've all done that. God, take your time. Think about it a little bit. Come back to me later on and we'll talk again. You must not realize, be watching what's happening. We've all done that at times. Listen, we can't outwit God. It is a waste of time to resist God and say no to God because God is king. And if God wants something to happen, it's going to happen. And the only deal is, are we going to do it the easy way or the hard way? Because God always wins. And we need to remember that. So what happens when this happens and the Ottoman Turks try to outwit God? When we try to do that, does God get all nervous and anxious? What am I going to do? Ron's not willing to cooperate with me today. How am I going to get this to pass? What does God do? Look at the next slide. God in heaven merely laughs. He's amused at all their puny plans. God's not threatened and challenged and worried when we sit there and resist and say no to God. He just sits back and laughs. He gets a good little chuckle out of this and say, He's going to do it. He just chose the hard way instead of the easy way. He wins. He's not threatened. He's not alarmed. He's not concerned when things aren't going according to our plans and how we think they need to be. Because God always wins, and it's not going to be a problem. And so it's going to happen. Well, let's look. Now, if the nations here, something just to make it clear, if the nations, as we read in Zechariah, are coming to destroy Jerusalem, there have to be Jews living in Jerusalem. If Jerusalem is a Palestinian nation, nobody's invading Jerusalem. The only reason people will want to invade Jerusalem and kill and destroy everybody living there is because there would be Jews living there. That's the only reason. There would be nobody else they'd want to bother and kill. It's because there are Jews. And so God told us in Ezekiel 36, and so we know that for the end times to come, Jews have to be in Jerusalem. And God said in Ezekiel 36, I'm going to take you out of the nations, gather you from all the countries, and bring you back where? Into your own land. Not Uganda or anywhere else. It was very generous, and they would welcome us with open arms and eager hearts, and we'll take every friend we can get. But God says, I'm bringing you back to your own land. You'll be in the land that I gave your forefathers. And so for the end times to come to pass, Jews have to be physically living in Jerusalem. And not only is there a physical restoration, but if we look at the next slide, Ezekiel 36 also says that after the Jewish people are physically living in the land of Jerusalem, he says, I'm going to sprinkle clean water on you, and you'll be clean. I'll cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols, and I'll give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you, and I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I'll put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. And so after the physical restoration of the Jewish people, after God brings the Jewish people physically back into the land of Jerusalem, there's going to be the spiritual restoration. He's going to remove those hearts of stone and give them a new heart and a new spirit. In the 1960s, 70s, what would happen was called the Jesus movement. And during this great move of God, when so many people came to faith in Jesus, there was also a great number of Jewish people that came to faith. And it began, but it's going to really come to pass in the end times. And let's move on and see here. But not only that, Paul tells us the same thing. God's not rejected his people. May it never be. And verse 11, does this mean that God's rejected the Jewish people forever? Of course not. His purpose was to make his salvation available to the Gentiles. Then the Jews would be jealous and begin to want God's salvation for themselves. And now if the whole world became rich as a result of God's offer of salvation, when the Jews stumbled over it and turned it down, think how much greater a blessing the world will share in later on when the Jews too come to Messiah. There is a spiritual restoration of the Jewish people. I mean, think about that. The Jews rejected Jesus as a nation, not everyone, and the Gentiles came in him. Now Paul says you have a secondary calling. What are you supposed to do? Make Jews jealous. I found a picture that really illustrates this, I think. The Jews would be jealous and begin to want God's salvation. This is how we have to make Jewish people feel. Not just Jews, but everybody else. Jewish people would say, wait, he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why are you loving going to church and worshiping him? He's my God. He's not yours. Why do you like him so much? I don't like him that much. I don't go to temple, and why do you? We need to make people jealous. They see the relationship that we have with God, and they say, I need what you have. One last scripture, Romans 11. Their rejection meant that God had offered salvation to the rest of the world, so their acceptance will be even more wonderful. Life from the dead. More wonderful. Wait a second. When the Jewish nation as a whole rejected Jesus, you from the nations received the gift of everlasting life. And Paul says, now you're going to get something even more wonderful. And the previous PowerPoint said, greater blessing? A greater blessing, more wonderful than everlasting life? What could that be? What does it say? Life for those who are dead. And 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul says, the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command and the voice of the archangel, the shofar call of God. And what will happen then? The dead in Messiah will rise. When Jewish people come to faith in Messiah, there'll be life from the dead for those who are dead, or the dead in Messiah will rise. Those two things sound like the same thing. There's a relationship between the return of Jesus and the salvation of Israel. And so I want to encourage you. You have a secondary role to make Jewish people jealous. That may not be your primary call as a church. This neighborhood, this community is yours. God as well has given you other specific callings and missions to seek and pursue. But as a Christian, Paul says you have a secondary calling to make Jewish people jealous. And you can actually be selfish and want to do it because there's a relationship between the salvation of Israel and the return of Jesus. So if you want to see Jesus return, bring world peace, and bring an eternity of living with Him, then we need to see the salvation of Israel. And so I want to encourage you to keep your eyes, your ears open if God brings you Jewish friends. And as well, if He does, remember I'm here to help you to reach them if you need help. And so feel free then to call me to come.